Hi, today's topic is the difference between liberty and freedom. And before we get really going into that, I wanted to talk a little bit about George Lakoff's book, The Political Mind. George Lakoff was a or is a professor of linguistics. I think he's still at the University of California, but he talked about how words have different meanings for different people and at different times, and things are constantly evolving. So I want to make sure that it's clear that we're talking about liberty and freedom in terms of this class, or in terms of really what we've been studying lately is really kind of like the British, or Commonwealth tradition. Lakoff talks a little bit about one of the examples he gives is he talks about the term liberal and how in the 19th century and most of the 20th century, liberal really meant more laissez-faire capitalist, or which would be more in that line. And then as we got into the 1980s and 90s, the Republican Party in the U.S. transformed the term liberal kind of into a bad term, where Democrats were branded as being too liberal or being too leftist. So I think that's kind of interesting. Then we just get on to really talking about liberty and freedom, and I'll just tell you one quick story about when I was a kid. In our neighborhood, there was a bike track on some DNR land behind our house, and one day, one of my friends and I decided we were going to dig out this pit for us to jump over. And My younger brother, who was concerned about not being able to jump over that pit, invoked the law of the land. And what he said, I still can remember this. Or he was in maybe like first grade, and he said, "The law of the land says that you can't change this course." And that was like the neighborhood kids had kind of been passed down since before, you know, when we were younger, and things that nobody could alter that course unless all the kids, in which there were like 8 in the neighborhood, got together and agreed that she could dig a bigger pit, because that way we didn't get angry with each other. But none of us really knew what the law of the land meant. But I think it's just very interesting to see how it's been passed down through history, and then how it ties into this topic. My understanding of really the difference between freedom and liberty is that freedoms are things that can be granted by the group, or by the ruler, the political authority. Things like the freedom to drive a car. We can grant that freedom by issuing a driver's license and things like that. What's more interesting to me is the idea of liberty, which really in most of our readings, what you get out of liberty is that there's actually liberties are going back to the law of the land. There are certain rules or certain rights that take first seat to what a king says, or what the local magistrate says, or what the group says. So there are natural laws out there, and I think it's interesting. Scott, one of the articles we read today, does I think a pretty good job of kind of running down through where some of these ideas come from, and he talks about Thucydides, where he says, "Hey, everyone." Thucydides' idea is everyone is equal before the law, and you can see how that idea rolls forward into, um, you know, trial by jury and things like that later. But he also then talks about Milton as a. This is I think also a really important idea. Is he's not talking about liberty from government, but liberty through government, or guaranteed by the government. So the government has to guarantee these natural rights. And if you look at the Declaration of Independence, the Magna Carta, the Constitution, some of these rights are asserted in there. And then he talks about the levelers, which is in England there, where they thought every man ought to be exempted from the choice of those who are to make the laws. So, and what I'm really trying to say there doesn't make a lot of sense, but if you don't get a choice in who represents you, you ought not to be held to the laws that body passes. So That's the right of person. Um, and I just think it's just pretty darn interesting. It's these ideas of natural laws. Um, and then finally, Robbins, she notes that real Whigs believed that everybody should be ruled by laws which they consented to, and that goes back to that leveler's idea. But that's in a way liberty, and then we'll talk a little bit more about some more of that here. Now, when Hayden's talking about the law of the land, again, we're talking about laws that even the king has to obey. The king can't overstep these rules, and I think it's really interesting. I'm doing my research on William Blackstone, and I think he's pretty interesting. He borrows real heavily from John Locke, but he believed that there were certain inalienable rights, or there's really three key points that he tries to make. And one is, he says we all have the right of personal security. In other words, someone can't take our life. We have the right to defend it through even murder. If someone's trying to take our life, we have the right to take someone else's life in defense of our own. But he also talks about limbs and things like that, which might not seem like a big deal now, but it wasn't that long ago that people were punished by removal of limbs and things like that. Then he talks about the right of personal liberty. And it's kind of interesting there. Really, what he's mainly talking about there is the right of locomotion, or the right to move around freely. And really, that ties into unlawful imprisonment. And that's where you get the idea of right to a jury, right of your peers. No one can arbitrarily just order you off to jail without proving that you've committed some offense. And the idea being that people like yourself should be the ones that determine that. And then the last thing he talks about, which is also huge, as go through the Declaration of Independence, the founding fathers, and everybody else, is the right of property. And here he just talks about, once you own something, somebody can't just come and take it away from you. And he even talks about, like, the right of, today you talk about eminent domain, where maybe they decide to build a school on your farmland, or run a, road through your property or something like that. And Blackstone actually there talks about you have a right to be made whole. So yeah, the government can take some of your property, but they have to give you something of equal value in return. Because that's a natural right, or a right that we have as people. And those three things are something that makes, going back to Hayden, that's something that makes the whole English-speaking peoples, or the Anglospheres, tract of how we understand liberty versus how some other societies like mainland Europe and South America and even Asia, it makes it very different how we understand liberty versus some other countries. So thank you.